Hey, what's up guys? Sir Emanon here, and welcome to another episode of Road to 1000 DuelingBook Rating. This is going to be the 5th day of me testing Phantom Knights, and we're going to be actually up against Virtual World today, which is going to be a pretty interesting matchup against the meta, one of the best decks that is of the format. But if you guys have not caught up with the other episodes in the series, go ahead and check out the playlist. I'll leave a link in the top right corner of the screen, as well as the description box below if you want to go ahead and watch those at a later time. But without further ado, let's go ahead and look at the list that we're going to be playing in today's episode. And I didn't really make too many major changes, but I made some. So the first one is I swapped out the third copy of Ancient Cloak for the Stained Greaves here. As per your guys' suggestions, this is a way to kind of help facilitate combo plays in tandem with Silent Boots as well as the Shade Reading. It's just another name to grab off of something like your Ancient Cloak, which is decent. Additionally, it could help in certain niche scenarios where you have to send it off of Cherubini with a PK heavy hand to get stuff out of your hand. That way it will make hand traps on Rusty hurt a bit less, or disruptions on Rusty hurt less. So even though this card is marginally worse to draw than the Ancient Cloak, you're not trying to draw these cards in a lot of cases anyways, so I figure it's pretty worth its slot in these cases where it comes up. And then the other change was actually swapping out Libic for the Edgem Sabers. So a comment pointed out that Tour Guide sending out Edgem Sabers when you draw one of your BAs actually functionally does very similar things. And additionally, this is a probably better card to have later on if you have duplicate Tour Guides, or if you open Torrent Scale Tour Guide and you go for Torrent Scale first. This could just be better follow-up. It also has the added benefit of just putting back your Red Eyes bricks, specifically Fusion, which is nice. It functions very similarly to Plague Spreader Zombie in that regard. So I do like these very minor changes. Again, they're not great to draw, but they weren't the focal point of the deck anyway, so that is a-okay in my opinion. So let's go ahead and now just check out the replay without any further ado. I accidentally skipped fast forward there, but we did win the RPS, and we're going to opt to go first. So our opening hand is the Torrent Scale, Double Cosmic Cyclone, Tour Guide, and the Stained Greaves. So we drew Torrent Scale again, funny. Yeah, this hand is one of those hands that just loses to a single interruption. Not a whole ton you can do about this. This only triggers when a PK is special summoned, so it's not like you can normal this and then special that. That would be nice, but no option there. So I decided to actually just go for the Torrent Scale play, simply because I want this as a way to kind of have a little bit of graveyard setup if I do get interrupted, and then follow up with a Tour Guide push next turn if need be. We go ahead and pitch Cosmic Cyclone. My opponent has no response, so we're going to go ahead and send Ancient Cloak. Ancient Cloak is then going to search us a copy of Boots. We're then going to special Boots, and I hold off from summoning the Stained Greaves right here because we do have a combo enough right at this point. And I figured that, okay, my opponent didn't Ash my Torrent Scale, didn't Meister my Ancient Cloak, so it's unlikely my opponent has a lot of interruptions. Granted, there is still the possibility of Bell, but I figured at that point I could be in a good enough position to where Bell wouldn't really matter a whole ton. So we just go ahead and go for the Cherubini. I can always summon this later if I need to. I don't want to commit more resources than I have to at this early stage of the combo. So we're going to do the Cherubini and then go grab summon Seer. Now, if I did have the Stained Greaves, I could easily go for the Levia play that I'm about to do, or just go straight up into Appaloosa, which is also fine. But again, I figured that my opponent really doesn't have too much disruption, and the Beaver main deck is a lot less popular now, so I'm just opting to not respect it in game 1, to be honest. We're going to go ahead and now use the Silent Boots to search Fogblade, and then go for Torrent Scale, which is going to bring itself back. Then we're going to overlay through the Levier. Again, we could have done this with the Stained Greaves as well, but this works too. It's a self-contained combo. So we're going to go Levier and then bring back the Ancient Cloak. It's always nice to have this in circulation, because if I had gone for the Appaloosa play, like I mentioned, this wouldn't really be an option. And this is really strong follow-up. It guarantees either Torrent Scale or Boots or whatever you want, really. So I like having this back. So that's one of the benefits of doing it this way. And then because we detach the Seer from the Levier, we can bring back the Graph to the zone that Cherubini points to before linking those two away for the Rusty. Now here's another window where I could have, and probably should have, summoned the Stained Greaves, because I opted not to, with the mindset that, okay, at the end of my combo, I'm going to set these back row. This is going to be the pitch fodder for Dragoon, and then Tour Guide's going to be my follow-up. And I was thinking, oh, with the Edgem Sabers, the follow-up is crazy, because, I could, stack whatever card I top deck and have, a third link material, and that's really nice. But I think I overvalued this a bit too much, because even though that's really strong, I would have had a lot of PK set up in Grave anyway. That's the whole reason of doing, the Levier combo. So I could have just had the Tour Guide in hand as my only card after the combo, and have that be the pitch fodder for Dragoon, which would have been totally okay, because what this kind of line of play leads me into or bottlenecks me into, I should say, is setting a copy of Shea Brigandine off of this Rusty. And while it might seem kind of very minor, it's going to make a difference. And you'll see that in just a bit. But we're going to go ahead and mill Ragged Gloves with the Rusty as well, and then use the Shea Brigandine that we set off of it, and then turn that into a copy of Link Spider. Again, this could have very easily been replaced with the Stain Greaves on summon of the Rusty, and then this could be a second Fall Blade. Just keep that in mind. Like, definitely, I promise I'm harping on that for a very, very particular reason. But we're going to go ahead and now go into Verite Anaconda, and then we're going to use the Ragged Gloves that we sent, and then send a copy of Wings. Then we're going to use the Wing effect to bring back the Torrent Scale that we sent back to the graveyard, and then use the Ancient Cloak to boost our Rusty. Definitely don't forget to do that. And then we're going to make our Break Sword, and then use Rusty to pop it. This is a pretty standard play by now that most people are aware of. We're going to use Break Sword to bring back our 2 PKs. They become level 4, so we can overlay for a copy of Eva Swarm Nightmare. It's not great against like Eldritch, but I still like this card against VW and Drytron. So this card's just really, really strong. It does different types of interruptions than the rest of the board, so I do like having variety in that respect. But we're then going to, of course, use the Verite Anaconda to finish off, and then go for the Dragoon. We're then going to set Fall Blade and Cosmic and end with these 2 cards in hand. Again, keep in mind the Stain Greaves can be a second copy of Fall Blade if I had sequenced differently. So our opponent is going to draw for turn, and then they're going to actually start with a copy of Foolish Burial Goods, and this is kind of a tell that they're on Virtual World. So I'm always happy to see this early, just because this kind of means that my opponent needs a way to start off their turn. So I am pretty happy to let this resolve, of course. My opponent's going to go ahead and search Gigi and then pitch Nian. Then they're going to normal summon the Gigi and then trigger the Nian in graveyard. And then here is a play that actually ultimately ends up losing me this entire game. So intuitively, right, you would think, okay, my opponent just summoned a monster. Let's prevent any Synchro Xyz plays and use the Eva Swarm Nightmare right here. But let's think about this a little bit further from like a more analytical point of view. I know the matchup now. I know it's Virtual World. And what card does every Virtual World player play? Triple Tactics Talents. So I'm thinking, okay, even if my opponent has a Triple Tactics Talents, I have Dragoon to negate it, right? So we can go ahead and do that and be totally fine. But what if my opponent had the statistical 5% chance to draw 2 Triple Tactics Talents? Well, then I just lose the game. So this is what I mean by why the Stain Greaves being a second Fall Blade matters, because the way to prevent this from happening is to hold off on Nightmare now that I know the matchup. Even though I made it blind and I'm not going to get value out of it, that's fine if it prevents me again from losing the game straight up. I can make my opponent do, or let my opponent do whatever Synchro Xyz plays that they want to, and then just flip a Fall Blade to prevent any of that from happening. Because at this point, right, like at any point, if Fall Blade goes to grave, I still have another interruption if I really have to with Rusty. And if I had the second Fall Blade to back it up, then I can stop 2 potential pushes instead of just 1. And the reason why this matters so much is that, yeah, people might say, oh, my opponent got really, really lucky, and it doesn't help the fact that my opponent actually drew the second copy of Triple Tactics Talents for turn. I mean, that is always unfortunate, but this was preventable. Like, this was a clear mistake, and it's not something that I would say my opponent like sacked me with or got lucky. I mean, it is fortunate for my opponent, yes, to draw this particular hand, but there were definite lines of play that I could have taken to just turn this game into a guaranteed victory. Instead, I let the 5% chance actually overtake this game, and that ultimately cost it. So this is a lesson in that, like, even though things like might seem really, really just everything kind of just went against you, there are likely still like things you could have done differently. And this is something that I will continue to pin as a mistake on my own end, and something that, again, I could have just changed to be able to affect the outcome of the game favorably. But my opponent's going to go ahead and now just pop my entire board. I can't really say or do anything about that. And then my opponent is going to follow up with the Lulu. Pretty obvious that they had that because they didn't search it off Qinglong. So they're going to send the Chuchi to add Kowloon. And then they're going to now use Kowloon to place Chuchi face up. And then they're going to modulate the Chuchi, or using Chuchi to boost Lulu to level 6. And then they're going to now go into Vermilion Dragon Mech. Now, this is my third time trying to record this video because every time I got to this part, I realized there was something different that could have happened, and then there were just things that I kept ignoring. And this is a this is a sequence that like I really needed to kind of sit down and dissect. So if you guys are not a fan of my long tangents, skip ahead. Feel free to do so because I'm going to probably talk for a lot here. So my opponent uses Vermilion Dragon Mech, targeting this set. Now, I'm going to be completely honest here. For some reason, when I was playing the game, I heard it and I thought he targeted the Fall Blade, which is what prompted me to scoop right away. But let's kind of analyze this whole sequence a bit further. So my opponent goes Vermilion Chainlink 1, targeting the set Cosmic. There's a couple of different ways to respond here. I have the ability to go Chainlink 2 Cosmic Cyclone, targeting the Chuche. Now, why would I do this? The reason is that if my opponent doesn't see the way that I can stay in the game, then my opponent might not be inclined to chain Chuche to hit the Verte. Because the way I stay alive in this game is if I use Fog Blade to target Verte Anaconda, so that my opponent cannot target it for attacks, and then Dragoon comes back to me. I have like all my stuff kind of left over. I can like normal summon Tour Guide, link it away, put the Fog Blade back in graveyard, reborn the Rusty, trigger Torrent Scale, do all that stuff, right? So that's the way I win this game, or come back from my mistake, is if Fog Blade sticks onto my Verte Anaconda. So I probably should have done Cosmic Channeling 2 and hoped that my opponent just didn't use Chuche in response to automatically hit the Verte. The other option could be to go the Fog Blade as Channeling 2, targeting my Verte, and hope that my opponent also uses the Chuche as Channeling 3 to hit the Fog Blade, realizing what I'm trying to do. And then I could use Cosmic as Channeling 4 and just punish my opponent there. And that would allow the Fog Blade to stick onto the Verte, and that would be good. But if my opponent didn't respond, or doesn't respond, hypothetically, right, to Fog Blade as Channeling 2 with the Chuche as Channeling 3, I would then kind of be in an awkward position. Like, say, I go Chain Fog Blade, and he goes no response. I'm like, well, then I would have to, I guess, use the Cosmic. But then that wouldn't really make sense, right? Because if this Cosmic goes to grave, and then my opponent just goes ahead and uses Chuche after the fact on the Fog Blade, then my opponent just hits me with the 4,000 attack Dragoon, right? And that's going to be enough for game because I'm on 2950. And it wouldn't matter that, like, he would have popped the Fog Blade and I could, like, get Rusty back and do all that stuff because this Verte is just sitting here. It's a sitting duck. So that's, like, the whole line of sequencing that could have done or been done there. So, again, I, for some reason, thought my opponent targeted the Fog Blade itself, which, like, would have definitely been a lot different because if my opponent targeted the Fog Blade and I chained the Fog Blade targeting the Verte, then it's just gonna die, right? Like, it's not gonna do anything. And at that point, like, yeah, I basically just 100% lost. But because my opponent targeted the Cosmic, there was a slim chance my opponent could have slipped up and I actually could have won the game. But again, I hovered over and DuelingBook, I thought, showed me Fog Blade. Maybe I like hovered my mouse too quickly. I mean, that can happen too. So that's the ultimate reason why I scoop. But it's like a really interesting kind of thought experiment. Like, what would have happened? Would my opponent have chained the Chuche to the Fog Blade? Like, because that probably would have been the ultimate, or the optimal line there. But yeah, there's just a lot of things to kind of dissect. So again, this is my third time trying to record this video because of this exact scenario, since there's a lot of different things that could happen here. But the end result is just me scooping anyways, because I thought that, okay, I just can't come back from this. And so I let my opponent go ahead and have that game. So again, that game is probably really frustrating. Well, I can't even say probably because I was a bit frustrated. But looking back on it, it's my own fault, right? I definitely could have just held off on Nightmare. I know the matchup. I know they play Triple Tactics Talents. I don't have to play into it. Even though I can negate the first one, if they have the second one, there's a chance that happens, and I lose the game instantly on the spot there. So I'm not gonna blame anybody but myself for that loss. That is 100% my fault. So we're then going to now move into the sighting pattern. It's pretty simple. I don't really like Forbidden Droplet going first against this deck. And I figured that like just having Lancey to back everything up is all right. It's a little bit iffy if I want to use like Fog Blade and Graveyard on my opponent's turn to like use the Breaksword Rusty interaction, but I figured this is better. Like denying Qinglong is good, so I figured this is fine. So yeah, let's go ahead and now move into game 2 without any further ado. If you guys are enjoying this commentary, definitely be sure to leave a like in the video and subscribe if you are new here and want to see commentaries similar to this style. But we're going to go first again, and our opening hand is Fog Blade, Kagemucha Knight, Skullmeister, Wielder, and Wing. So none of the good starters, unfortunately. We do again just kind of die to one hand trap, so we got to go for it, right? So we're going to normal the Kagemucha Knight, and then special the Wielder. and then we're going to go for a copy of Cherubini, use Cherubini effect. We're going to send Graph, that's a misclick of course, and then Graph gets ashed. It didn't really matter what I sent, right? If I sent like any of the PKs, I was getting ashed regardless. There's really not a whole lot to be said about this one. We're just going to set our 2 traps and then hope it's good enough. My opponent's going to draw for a turn, and then he's going to activate Kowloon, which is really good. That's going to place Chuche face up. And then my opponent's going to use Lulu, targeting the Chuche. I wish I had Cosmic for this one, but not this time. They're going to send the Qinglong and then add the Gigi. And my opponent's going to go ahead and use Lili next. Again, like, the problem sometimes with PK is that, like, the Fall Blade just doesn't interact with the VWs in hand at all. But by the time you're, like, trying to interact with your extra deck stuff, if you don't have, like, other things to back up your board, it's just not going to be, it's not going to be a good time. But my opponent's going to then use Gigi and then send Chuche, summon itself, and that's going to trigger the Nian. I opt not to Skullmeister this because I'm holding this for Qinglong, because I don't want my opponent to have Lalo access, right? And my opponent already had like tuners anyways, and could go in like Vermilion or Coral Dragon or Stardust Charge or whatever, right? So I didn't really see a whole point. My opponent actually goes for Juju instead. And my opponent's going to actually raise Juju by 3. And then go and make a Vermilion right here. And then my opponent's going to use Nian to recycle and then use the Qinglong effect now. Here's where I go ahead and use Skullmeister. But my opponent's going to use the Vermilion, and that's going to hit the Fall Blade. I ultimately decide to go ahead and just chain it, because it probably wouldn't have mattered a lot anyway. I mean, it really didn't matter because my opponent can just make VFD right here since this is a level 9, thanks to it being raised by the Chuche earlier. But my opponent's going to just pop it. Again, it ultimately was not a determining factor this game. My opponent's then going to Juju. And that was a misclick. I thought he was targeting the Cherubini, but he was targeting my set. So I'm just going to chain the wing on my Cherubini and hope it's good enough. And then we're going to watch as my opponent attacks, clears my Cherubini through the wing's protection, and then makes a VFD. And then to add insult to injury, my opponent had the Lalo anyway. So yeah, maybe hitting the Nian would have been better, I guess, because it would have like perhaps stopped Vermilion from coming out, but because my opponent had Lalo, or even if my opponent didn't have Lalo, my opponent could have just used a Qinglong, search it, and then bring it back anyway, and then I'd be in the same position. So I don't think it really mattered. We weren't going to get past the VFD regardless, let alone VFD, Chuche, and Shen. So yeah, this is kind of the thing that can happen sometimes, is that if you open a not very strong hand, and your opponent has a hand trap for you, which they often will, you can just kind of get steamrolled, and that's kind of just the unfortunate nature of PK sometimes. So we do lose this match. It kind of seemed like a blowout if you think about it, right? Like game 1, we got blown out by double tactics talent, or triple tactics talent. That is so annoying to say. But yeah, my opponent used triple tactics talent to completely wipe my board, and then this game, I just got hand trapped on a weak hand. But again, this can happen, right? I'm not going to try and sugarcoat things and be like, hey, every single game of PK is going to look like a 2-0 win, right? This can happen, and it's part of the reality of playing, especially against some of the best decks. And it's why, or one of the reasons at least, why PK is not more highly represented as opposed to these decks. Because I'm not going to try and sell every deck as if it's the best deck ever, because that's just not realistic. But to be fair, again, some of these errors were just that. They were just errors on my end, especially in game 1. I don't know if there's a whole lot I could have really done differently in game number 2 here, to be perfectly honest. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts if you had any different lines of play. But game 1, definitely, I could have held off on the Nightmare and just been more patient and thought about triple tactics a bit more. But this is a valuable lesson in just being mindful of that. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like as well as any thoughts or feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more informative and competitive video content. If you want to, you can follow me on all social media platforms or support me via Patreon and TCG Player, all the links in the description as usual. And until next time, I'll catch you in the next video. See you guys.